Kalyan Krishna. I'm a program manager in the Microsoft Identity Division, closely working with developers on various features of our identity platform in Microsoft Graph. With me is George. George, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Juma George. I'm a program manager with the change tracking team in Microsoft.
Thank you, George. And today we will be covering in detail one of the new features that we have built in the Microsoft Graph platform that you would find very useful. This is a feature that we built to help the developers who are using the change notification features of Microsoft Graph to get changes delivered to their application. We have added support for these via Azure Event Hubs to help you with a lot of scalability and compute issues. So without further ado, we will basically agenda cover the following in the session today. For those of you who are quite familiar with change notification, we'll just briefly cover Microsoft Graph and what change notification is before jumping into the actual topic in the hand. And then we will talk about the change notification delivery via Event Hubs, and we will have we have made time for a full-fledged demo that you can see how all of this comes together in an application via and the various places in Azure portal where you have to set this up. So going forward, just a brief introduction to Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph is the API for Microsoft today. We let you get access to all the data that is there for your own organization or your customers via a single REST API interface, and you can build all kinds of experiences like add-ins, bots, and obviously add richer experiences in your own existing applications. This is our API of choice going forward for all Microsoft products and is constantly evolving to address newer features and newer products that Microsoft keeps building and bringing into the market. The Graph API is quite rich. One of the features that it also supports, apart from a usual CRUD operations, is the ability of your application to track changes with webhooks, or also known as change notifications. This particular feature of Microsoft Graph is a very powerful one, which allows your application to basically get notifications for selected entities from Microsoft Graph itself, rather than you as an application developer making calls like delta querying, which is another powerful feature, to track changes in the data. So for example, if you like to have your application notified of all the changes in the users that are present in a tenant, you can either use a delta query, which will let you know what changes have happened in the users side of a tenant, like maybe a number of users were deleted, updated, or added, or you can do so by, or this is enabled by you making delta queries calls periodically. What Graph also supports is that you should not bother with delta querying at all. You can basically set up change notifications to listen to all changes on the user side of things, or instead of you making calls, it is the Microsoft Graph which will make a call to your application to notify you of all the changes that are happening on the user side of things. Very powerful, allows applications to be notified when data changes in Microsoft Graph. You can subscribe to a set of notifications. You do not have to subscribe for the entire set of notifications for a tenant. You can choose the supported entities like users and groups. You can renew subscriptions because subscriptions are not forever. You get to subscribe for a change notification for a certain entity and actions for a set amount of time. And this is also something which is used for delta querying. So if you are confused about, or you struggle with what is the best interval to delta queries, the change notification is used as one of the ways to basically get a notification that data is changing and it is time for the application to do delta query. This is what generally the webhooks or change notifications are. Again, as I mentioned, they are quite popular for events like messages, events, contacts, users. You can keep your data up to date. You don't have to poll at regular intervals. And Microsoft Graph provides the guarantee that your application will get all the change notifications for all the changes that are happening and that you have subscribed for. Going forward, if you have an application developer, you will basically set up a subscription and you will develop a client application which should provide a web service which is facing internet and can receive notifications from Microsoft Graph. So that's how the applications come together. With this introduction of change notification, we have a couple of questions for you, and we were hoping if you could basically give us some answers in the chat window. So the first question we have is that of these Azure services, which one are you most familiar with? Or if you're familiar with all of them, just say A, B, C, D, that's fine. Okay, that's a good answer. We should have given E as none, so we forgot to do that. So yep, you can say none as well. Thank you. Cool. I think we are done with this one. So let's move to the next question. Do you use change notifications in your applications today? How many of you are familiar and already using it in your code? The question was more specific to Microsoft Graph. Okay, I take it that we are done. Thank you for your answer. It seems like most of you have not used change notifications, and I hope that the very brief overview that I had covered was useful. If you need to just, I will post a couple of links later, which has a set of resources and recording that I did for this community call only on an introduction and demo or to get started on change notifications. You would find it quite useful to get started if this feature and the change notifications as a feature in general is of interest to you. With that, I will move on to the next slide and introduce you to this particular feature, which is to get change notifications delivered via Azure Event Hubs. So why did we build this feature, what this is, and this is what we will cover here now. So change notifications, as I had mentioned earlier, is delivered to you via a REST endpoint that you expose on the internet for Microsoft Graph to send notifications to. The Azure Event Hubs is a popular real-time events ingestion and distribution services built for scale. And that built for scale is the aspect where we would basically discuss things in a lot more detail. You can, of course, now with this feature being available in GA, you can use Event Hub instead of your traditional web API endpoint to receive change notifications. Why did we build this? First thing we built it for is high throughput scenarios. Let me explain that in a little bit more detail. Now, while Graph will send change notifications to your applications, it does expect you to acknowledge it within a certain specified period of time. What that means is that, let's say, if your application ends up in a certain customer tenant, where the change notifications are extremely large in nature and you don't necessarily have the compute available to process all of them within the time Microsoft Graph expects you to do so, it creates issues is because then your notifications start to drop. In this case, redirecting these notifications to Azure Event Hubs allows your applications to process notification at its own pace. We also addressed a few scenarios where this requirement of publicly exposing a URL or an endpoint for Microsoft Graph to call was not acceptable to some customers who had somewhat different or more on-premise focused security postures. Temporizing. This is a very common complaint that we had received is that because you have an endpoint that Microsoft Graph can call anytime and it's completely non-deterministic in nature when you would get these notifications delivered to you. The existing system required the developers to do a lot of work if they wanted to update their application that was receiving and processing notifications from Microsoft Graph. And this means that if they had to take down the application for any reason, they would miss notifications in that period. So This particular scenario also helps you basically disconnect the application maintenance from availability and allows you to update your applications and while not worrying about missing any change notifications. Similarly, some examples of high throughput scenarios that we saw and we have addressed, and you would actually find it quite useful, is if your application is subscribing to, for example, a large set of resources, which means that you will get a large set of notifications. What if somebody in the company decided that they will write a PowerShell script to update, job titles of all 150,000 or 1 million employees in an organization? That means that you will get 1 million notifications, and that's just one resource multiplied by number of resources that are available. And you might get a number of notifications on your app that your compute capacity that you have provided for your app might not be able to handle it. Similarly, applications subscribing to resources with high frequency, like group memberships and even users to some extent. Multi-tenant applications are another unique set of applications which will definitely benefit from it. So those of you who have developed multi-tenant applications, you will realize that as your application makes it to hundreds, if not thousands of tenants, the number of notifications that your application has to now be prepared to listen to grows considerably, including wide variety of scale or frequency or volume that your application now has to expect. You will definitely find this feature quite useful if you are a multi-tenant app developer. Again, today this change delivery mode is available for all resources that support change notifications. Microsoft Graph has hundreds of entities, but not all entities support change notification today. While we continue to work to enrich the number of entities that are available for change notifications, all of these entities are also available for you to use in your application if you're using Azure Event Hubs today. So just to give you a brief flow diagram of how all of this works together, your application first creates a subscription. So you create a subscription, you say, Graph, I need to listen to all the changes that are happening for the users entity and the groups entity. So that means that all the changes that happen to users, like creation, deletion, updations, and groups is something that your application should be sent a notification about, because you are interested in listening about them and processing them. Now, Microsoft Graph, earlier in this create subscription, you will provide a link to a publicly available notification URL where Microsoft Graph will actually send you the notifications for all of these changes. Today, because your application will not be getting the notifications directly from Graph, what happens is that there is a special application and a tenant called Microsoft Graph Change Tracking. This basically would send the notification on the Event Hubs for you. So the way it comes together is that you create an Event Hub namespace and an Event Hub, and you provide the connection string of that Event Hub as a secret in Keyboard. So Microsoft Graph will pull out this connection string, connect to this Event Hub, and place the notification there. At this point, your application, whatever you have chosen as the manner to get events from Event Hub, can go and pull these events according in the manner and in the frequency as it pleases. So this is how the whole thing comes together. And this is where I'm going to take a pause now and see if we have any questions in the chat. All right, yeah, please go ahead and raise your hand and unmute yourself if you want to as well.
Can you explain multi-tenant scenario, how that works?
So there are two things to it. So multi-tenant applications are a thing in itself. We will do a demo for you, Carlos, and after that, can we take this question again? Is that the demo was able to help you out or not? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. As a developer, how is it going to help me? It depends on whether you have change notifications being used in your applications today. The reasons we had to build it, as I had explained a bit earlier, is that Let's say you set up a web application and a web API and you set a subscription with Microsoft Graph, and you are expecting Microsoft Graph to send you all the changes, let's say, that happens in the user side of a tenant. The problem happens is that if the number of changes are run into, let's say, hundreds of thousands or millions, your compute capacity, or let's say that the Azure service that you have provisioned or Azure website might not be able to process all the change notifications within the time that Microsoft Graph expects you to acknowledge that you received a change notification. And what happens in these cases is that the notifications starts dropping. In this case, if instead of creating a subscription with your own web URL or your own web API, you basically redirect all the messages to Event Hub. So if there are huge changes in the frequency and quantity of notifications, your applications will still be able to process those. It is something like an audit log. Yes, you can use it like an audit log. Let's say if you're interested in all the changes in users and groups, you can definitely use change notifications to log them on what changes are. It works with Azure AD groups, yes. No, it does not change any numbers or limits today, Ryan, that you can subscribe to. Does the subscription renewal require a renewal every hour, or it will be? No, it still requires renewal. George, you might want to touch on Christian Walling's question here.
Yes. Okay, just to emphasize that nothing changes from the traditional webhooks. Just as we were creating subscriptions and renewing them after the expiry date and time, we will still proceed with the same process.
Okay. Yes, it works with AAD groups. It will. Sorry, you want to take up the next question from Marco? Sorry.
So Marco, yes, it works with the AAD groups. So we have all the resources, all the workloads are enabled in Azure Event Hubs as well. Yeah. So nothing. I think I've seen Ryan's question that we have a limit of 1,000 total subscriptions. So this doesn't solve that limit. We are still going to retain the limit. So the limit still applies.
Are there plans to eventually change that limit?
Well, I can take that up for later, but maybe just something to emphasize on the lifetime of the subscriptions is that there's work in progress to be able to notify you when your subscription is about to end or when something happens to your subscription. But in terms of the limit, I think I'll take that up and probably just respond later. Yeah.
Okay, there is one final question from Priyan, which is that it supports AAD synced groups or security groups. It supports all the groups that are available in the Azure AD tenant. Their membership can be synced from on-prem, but to Azure AD and to Microsoft Graph, they're just groups available in an Azure AD tenant today, and that's how it is. It's not really something that the Microsoft Graph discriminates today. And thank you, Marco. Yes, the renewal and subscriptions time limits differ from resource to the various resources. One of the great things about Microsoft Graph is that it basically hides or abstracts a lot of these various other older APIs or products that have been around for decades. But sometimes it also means that some of these older products have their own ways of setting their limits and subscription limits and frequencies. So it's always advisable that you go through our documentation to make sure that if you are if you are looking at running into limits with subscriptions, number of subscriptions created, or even things like throttling, different entities treat these differently, and your application should be built according to that. Make sure that you do not get surprised in this case. Okay, so thank you for all the questions. This was a really good exercise. I will now transfer to George, who would basically take over and do the demo for all of us.
Okay, so just pick up where Kadian left. Thanks, Kadian, for that intro. So we are going to be taking you through how you'll be creating Azure Event Hubs that your application can listen to for notifications. We'll also, the version of the Event Hub you're using requires that for you to create a processor or rather a listener onto the Event Hub, you need an Azure storage. So we'll take you through how you can create that in a few steps, and then we'll also create a policy, an access policy onto the Azure Event Hub, so that it has a listen capability that will enable you to access the notifications as and when they come. Okay, some steps to follow. So we have some steps that you can follow when configuring Azure Event Hubs. Although I'll take you through this, but at least they are documented, and we'll be able to share that in our references later in the presentation. I'll also take you through how you can receive events using a simple .NET application. So we'll configure an application and then we'll be able to receive notifications using that application. So some of the other things that you'll need to create, I think, as mentioned earlier, the Azure Key Vaults. So the Key Vaults just helps with the security layer for abstracting the connection, the Azure Event Hub connection string, so that Microsoft Graph picks the connection string directly from the Key Vaults rather than exposing the connection string to the application. And this is mostly useful when creating the subscription. Then I'll also take you through how you can give access you can give access your access to the Key Vault. You can give the application Microsoft Graph change tracking to your Key Vault so that you're able to receive notifications. Okay, and then we'll use a simple application that will show us how you can access applications. It's a simple console application that we can all go through. Okay, so some of the advantages that you don't need to have a notification URL installed on your end. Rather, when creating the subscription, you will give the subscription notification URL the Azure Key Vault URL. I'll show you how to do that as well when we'll be going through the new URL, the way the URL looks when you are subscribing for Azure Event Hubs. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, the Azure Key Vaults are just for securing the connection strings for the Event Hubs. So you'll need to create a secret that will store the key, the key to the Azure Key, the Azure Key Vault ID. And something else that we'll do is add the Event Hub connection string to your Azure Key Vault. Okay, and then I'll of course show you how you can give access to a Microsoft Graph Change Tracking application as an access policy. Okay, let's get to it. This is how the new URL will look. Traditionally, it's just a URL. Basically, from an application perspective, you can host a web service on your end, and that web service is what you will give to a subscription, so that whenever there's a change, our webhook application will be able to send notifications to your endpoint. But there are downflows, as we have mentioned earlier, is, for instance, what happens when your application is down. Although it's a powerful tool that we can actually notify you when the change comes, there's a dependency whereby you must have a URL. But in this case, your URL will look something like this. So you'll have the Azure Event Hub as the first key, and then you'll have you'll just replace Azure Key Vaults where you have this parenthesis. You'll just replace Azure Key Vault with the Key Vault name, and then you'll also replace the secret name. So remember, I mentioned earlier that you'll have a secret that will have one of the value of the secret will be the Azure Event Hub connection string, and then you'll also use the tenant ID domain name. So for instance, if your company is example.com, so probably you'll have the domain name there when setting up. Okay, mention this. Then this is how the subscription payload will look. So basically in this, if I can explain, it just shows that we will be listening in for any updated requests or deleted requests. So there's a third one, which is create, but for this payload, we were just listening for the two. And then the notification URL. So we'll show you how a sample looks like in the presentation. And then, of course, the resource. So we look at users for this one, and then the expiry date and time. So this remains. So we'll have the expiry date and time there, and then the client state that will help you identify notifications based on your subscription. And let's get to it. So I'll just take you through the first step. The first step that you will need to do is to register an application. So basically, you register an application from Microsoft Azure, and what you do is just you'll come here and add an application name. So maybe test app. Let me just say something random. And then you can choose accounts in organization directory only. I normally go with that most of the time, but you can also go with other accounts, including Xbox and Skype. Then the next thing is that under redirect URL, you will have to add a local host. Then you register the application. So some of the activities that you will do after registering the application is, first of all, you need to copy the application ID, which is really important in this case because you will need the application ID when connecting to the Event Hub. And then under security, just confirm that everything under authentication is as expected. Okay. Then you can also look at application permissions. So under application permissions, you need to grant some permissions. So for instance, we will reading and probably updating users from our application. So you need to add a permission. It's a delegated permission that we are using currently. So all you need to do is just go to add permission. Then you click Microsoft Graph, and that will bring you here where you choose the delegated permissions. You can search. So for instance, here I'll search user, and I should be able to get read all or read write. So I can pick read write, for instance, and with that, the next step is just to grant admin consent to our tenant for these two permissions. So that will create the application. So the next step is basically it's key to confirm that you've granted the permission. So that's why I was looking at this. So the next step is to create an Azure Event Hub. So if you go to the Event Hubs page, it's easy to access that. You can easily come here and just type in on the search, and you can select Event Hubs. So once you do that, the next thing is just to come and click Add if you want to create an Event Hub. So of course you'll add the permissions and details, and then this is basically a namespace we are creating because you have to create a namespace then the Event Hub itself. So I'll just do NS 2020, just do something random. We'll clean up later. And then for the pricing tier, you can select standard should work. Then you create. So once you create that, you should, it takes a bit of time. But once you create that, you should be able to create, because this is a one I created earlier, and I'll be able to go back to the one we've just created. This is the one. So this is the namespace. So once this is created, we should be able to create an event hub on that resource. Let's give it a bit of time, sorry. Okay. Maybe while it's creating, you can go to creating a storage account. As I mentioned earlier, you need a storage account to connect to the Azure Event Hubs from an application perspective. So if you go to search, you should be able to access the storage account domain. So from there, all you need to do is just add. So I'll select a subscription that can work, and then just add the storage account name. So with that, you just create. So there's some bit of validation, but we can confirm that the event hub namespace was created. So the next step is just to come and create an event hub under the namespace. So let me just pick up this and just say, so we're going to do a couple of things. So this creates the event hub, and some of the things that we will need to copy includes the event hub. So we'll first go to overview just to confirm everything looks well, and then we go to shared policies. So we need to add a policy here with both send and listen functionality. So here I'll just say test policy, and then we'll give it both, because you want to both update users and also create and view users. Okay, so we are going to copy the connection string. So when you copy the connection string, remember this is the connection string that you're going to add into your Azure Key Vaults. So that's what we'll go to next. I just wanted to come here at the storage just to confirm that this created. While it creates, we can go and create an Azure Key Vault. So this is what we talked about earlier, that we want to secure the connection string for our event hub. So when you go to search again, you will be able to see Azure Key Vaults. So just select this, and then with that, you just enter the name. Okay, just Key Vault. So you can leave the rest as default. Yes, so once this is created, I'll show you how we will add the Event Hub connection string to our Key Vault and get the connection string, or rather the URL for our Key Vault that we'll use later. Okay. So I'll copy that. Normally you take the connection string, the primary connection string. So when you go to the resource after this has been created, the next thing is just to go to secrets in the Key Vault, that you have created, and then you click on generate and create. So with that, the next step is just to add the secret name. So I'll just do a secret. Okay, let me just press now. And then all you need to do is just type in or most probably just paste the connection string there. You can leave the rest as default. Okay. So that creates for you a secret. So the secret, all you need to do is get the secret identifier. That should reduce some of the activities that we'll do. But once you copy that, this is what we will use to create the subscription. So as I mentioned earlier, we've created an event hub. We've created a storage account. So under the storage account, we just left with one thing, just to create a container. So the container, as I mentioned earlier, the event hubs that we're using requires that we create a storage account with a container that the event hub will use for connection, that the event hub processor will use for connection. So just add in a name here, just container, and yeah, that should work. So with that, the next step is simply to go and update the details that we've got. So we have, this is a test, and so it's okay. The credentials are okay. So we have the event hub connection string. So the event hub connection string, for creating the subscription, that's where we abstract the connection string. But within the application, you should have the connection string. So I've indicated it there. We have the event hub name. Okay, and we have the storage connection string. So for the storage connection string, you can, let me just fetch my storage connection string here. Just a second. Account, forgot to that field. Yeah. Okay. So under the access keys, I forgot to mention that you'll need to copy the storage connection string that we will use in our application. So that is what we have here. And then we have the container name. We created a container together. And then you also have the client ID. The client ID is basically the application ID. When you are creating this application, under overview, you should be able to see the client ID. So with that, all you need to do is to replace the details that we have here. The tenant domain is basically your tenant, the tenant domain name. So you can replace this with what you have. And then the redirect URL is basically HTTP localhost, as we added in earlier. And then the notification string, as I mentioned, will be used for creating the subscription. So this is also important. So I'll just go ahead and run this just so you can see how it runs. So it will request for consent. Yeah, so once the consent is granted, then the next step is that it has already connected to the event hub, and the next step is just to fetch messages and all the users that are in our tenant. So with that, I think you should be able to configure. We can share we have this source code in our training pack and hosted in GitHub. We will be able to share the URL in the recording. Yeah, I think I can hand it over back to you, Carlian, if that's fine.
Thank you, George, for that great demo. That was all we had today for you to go through. And if you have any questions, please use the chat window. If you can raise your hands, we can take them for you in the time we have remaining. Yeah, Stephen, this is one of the problems that we solved with Azure Event Hubs, where customers had issue with publicly exposing endpoints on the internet. So you should definitely give it a try. Paul, are you are you going to still show us how to get data into the Event Hub in the first place? In the demo, Paul, you would have noticed that there was a connection string that we had created and placed in as a secret in the key vault. So that has the connection string and a secret to write data into Event Hub. That's what the Microsoft Graph Change Notification app, or Microsoft Graph uses this particular application named Microsoft Graph Change Notification to access Key Vault, get a connection string to the Event Hub, and start writing your events there. I hope that answers your question, Paul. Will this work in an Event Hub that includes a firewall? Same. Troy, I don't have an answer for this. George, do you know this answer to the question that Troy has?
Will the Event Hub work in event? So by firewall, I'm not sure exactly the question. Maybe Troy, you can come and ask. Yeah, then probably we'll understand it further.
So in this case, it would be an Event Hub where the firewall on the Event Hub has been configured to be enabled, and you're using IP filtering on the Event Hub itself.
Okay, yeah, I think in that case, yes, then it will work because you'll have whitelisted the IP for the Event Hub server. So it should be okay, it should work.
So then the Graph API will be able to push the changes to the Event Hub while it has a firewall in place.
Yes. You just need to configure the key vault, so and the connection string. So that should work for you.
The next question from Russell is, why did he go with Event Hub instead of plain Azure queues? I think the decision was based on which one is more scalable, but George, you want to take that question as well?
Yes, that's fine. We're actually looking to, we have some upcoming work, so we'll be looking to do the same with Azure event grids and Azure storage queues. So yeah, this is well covered. We should be able to have that in the next phases. Yeah, that's Marco.
We will share the deck, so you should be able to go through the documentation and the code sample and give it a try. Okay, it seems like we have answered your questions. Again, feel free to continue to use this chat window if you have more. These are the resources that are provided to you. These are all the links that you need to get everything you want and everything we have published on this particular topic. And I'm going to copy paste just this as well. And Stephen, you want to take over and do the closing for us?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you everyone for joining us today. The recording will be posted on YouTube, and we'll put a link to the PowerPoint in the description of the YouTube video. All right. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and thank you for your feedback and for being engaged with us today.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. I hope this is very useful use of your time. And thanks, Stephen, George.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.